And welcome back, as it were, to ProCon. Hopefully you were with us during the last session. And welcome to this first of two CEO, Executive Director, Peer Community sessions. If you're not an exec or meant to attend a different session, I invite you to return to the conference platform and find the other links to the other peer community sessions going on at the moment. For those I have yet to meet, I am Gabe Most. I am the Chief Experience Officer at JCC Association. And also staffing this call with me from JCC Association is Leah Garber. She, most of you know, is the Vice President for Israel Engagement and Director of the JCC Association Center for Israel Engagement. And she is with us tonight from Modi'in, Mevaseret. She's nodding. Modi'in, and we wish her mazal tov on the birth earlier today, last night, of her 8th grandchild, a grandson. So mazal tov.
Thank you.
Wow. Very, very exciting.
Thank you.
Feel free to chat to either of us if you have a technical issue, and we'll be happy to help you. But I think we're pretty much in tune with the Zoom thing by now. Before we get to the main content, a couple of housekeeping items. As you see, the session is recorded. If you're uncomfortable with having your screen on, feel free to shut it off. But for the sake of everyone else and for Jerry, we'd love for you to leave it on as much as you can so we can see each other. I also made a note before we got started that although a lot of us have known each other for a long time, we don't all know each other. So if you're invited to change your name here in Zoom to include your JCC name or the city you're in, so that folks, including Jerry, will have a sense of who you are and where you are even before you speak. You'll see that we've enabled the closed captioning. If you haven't seen that before, you can shut it off or move it around. If you're not familiar with it, it's a new-ish on Zoom, so please feel free. On the topic of relatively new execs, I went looking to see how many execs have joined the ranks of the senior leader at a JCC since this group last gathered in person in January 2020. And I don't know if I have an adjective for how I felt, but it seemed like a healthy number. And with your indulgence, I just want to acknowledge those folks because it is a healthy number and welcome them. So here we go, not in one breath, but I'll tell you. Amongst us now for the first time in this this kind of gathering, although they may have been here virtually during the year, is Josh Bender in Rockville, Gary Bernstein in Kingston, New York at Friedman, Jacob Brodowski and Lexi Yerman, who are the joint heads of BB Camp in Winnipeg. Dan Brotman became CEO in Windsor, Ontario, Samantha Dubrinsky in Springfield, Mass. Myron Flagler is back serving as interim in Columbia, South Carolina. Paul Geduldig, as you may have read, will be assuming the role in execs in San Francisco coming up in May. Jonah Geller is the CEO in York, Pennsylvania. Deborah Goldfarb in Long Beach, Alpert. Javi Goldshire is serving as the interim CEO of Capital Camps. Eitan Graubert of Pioneer Camp. Daniel Horowitz in Miami. Amy Johnson is the interim in Birmingham. Ronnie Kleiman in Oceanside, New York, that's Friedberg. Oded Kraus became the CEO in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Orit Lender in Staten Island. Orly Lewis in Richmond. Kenny Mandel in Union, New Jersey. I'm about 2/3 through. David Posner is the CEO of both the Albany and Schenectady JCCs. Also assuming the role of CEO since January 2020, Michael Rawl in Buffalo. Elise Rosen in Montreal, Margaret Rosenblatt in Margate City, New Jersey. Craig Salgado is the interim in San Francisco before Paul takes over. Michael Schlank, New Jersey Y Camps. Davis Shub in DC at the Edlovich JCC. Rona Shore in Calgary. Jay Steinberg in Wynwood, Pennsylvania. That's Kaiserman. He'll actually be serving as interim, and Alan Schur of 14th Street Y will become CEO in July. Lee Trepnick of Tamarack Camps. And last but not least, Denise Wolf became CEO of Youngstown JCC when Michael Rawl moved to Buffalo. So welcome one and all. I see so many people on the call, and I'm sure lots of you are here. We're certainly glad to have you. Couple words about ProCon. As you know well, JCC Association is thrilled to be offering this experience at no cost to JCCs or to individuals. And of course, that's possible because of generous sponsors. Many of those representatives are attending sessions and also are going to appear in the virtual vendor hall that you've heard about multiple times. Today's slot for that is 4 to 5 p.m. and we certainly hope you'll join them and say hello and show appreciation to them for making this possible by entering their virtual booth for at least a couple minutes. There's also a chat feature if you don't have their contact information, chat feature in the conference site. I'm going to personally thank the sponsors of this CEO peer community session and tomorrow's peer community session, and those are Acrosoft Corporation and Collaborative Strategies. A number of you joined a call last week in which Saul Levencius, the CEO and bar shop JCC of San Antonio, and Peter Blair, the CEO of the Levine JCC in Charlotte, spoke about their migration to Acrosoft Freedom. And Acrosoft Corporation has been, as many of you know, better than I do, probably a longstanding partner of the movement and continues to create and provide total software solutions that empower JCCs to thrive in a digital world. So we hope you'll connect with their CEO and president, Jeff Klein, later in the virtual booth. Many of you are also well familiar with Collaborative Strategies, led by Brian Hayden, whom I know you've had the pleasure of working with on many occasions. CSI has supported strategic business planning for over 25 years in JCCs. I reverse that. For over 25 JCCs in the past 15 years, they've been engaged in strategic planning, helping strengthen their business models to succeed in challenging times. And certainly that's, we're in another one now. Collaborative Strategies has also partnered on the continued development and implementation of JCC benchmarking since 2006. We hope you have a chance to visit Brian this afternoon as well in the virtual booth. So with that, on to our session for today. As a relative newcomer to the JCC movement, and for those who weren't around, I started about 5 weeks before the pandemic began. The conversations I had with Daron Krakow, both before I started and just after, are still pretty fresh in my mind. Among other things, I learned about one of his visions, which was to dramatically increase philanthropy to JCC Association, which would then make its way to JCCs, a vision he still holds today. He was fond of saying, and still is, that the money's out there. In those pre-pandemic weeks, we didn't spend time on talking about revenue streams at individual JCCs, didn't have a chance to talk about video. I have since learned from some folks who speak about the revenue streams as a three-legged stool. This is not new to anyone on this call. The three legs, primary revenue streams being fitness, early childhood, and camp. And given the dramatic effect of the pandemic on all three of those legs, at least for a time and for times that we don't know how long they'll last into the future, there certainly is a lot more conversation about philanthropic work by individual JCCs. Not that there wasn't before, but this question of historic reliance on fee-for-service and what is the role of philanthropy in the local JCC. It's that notion that led us to want to focus on JCC fundraising for this particular session. And we thought of no one better to invite to teach us today and talk with us today than Jerry Silverman to share his perspective and engage with us on the topic. Specifically, the unique opportunities in this particular moment of COVID and maybe coming out of COVID, hopefully soon. And we're so grateful, Jerry, that you agreed to be here. For those who are not familiar, Jerry served as president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America, JFNA, from 2009 to 2019. Under his leadership, JFNA realigned its priorities and organizational culture with a focus on its 147 federations and the additional 300 network communities. Together, they raise $2 billion annually. And JFNA manages $20 billion in assets and endowments. Before JFNA, Jerry was leading the Foundation for Jewish Camp and also held executive positions at StrideRight and Levi Strauss & Company. So a mixture of the nonprofit Jewish world and corporate world. Jerry's an outspoken advocate for Jewish peoplehood and widely known for his views on enhancing religious pluralism in Israel and strengthening Jewish communities worldwide. And for many reasons is highly regarded and sought after for his deep expertise and perspective around philanthropy. In a moment, I'm going to turn things over to Jerry. After his remarks, probably during and after, we'll be having a Q&A and discussion. Feel free to use the raise hand feature. We're already a healthy group here, rather than chiming in, so we're not talking over each other, and we'll be happy to call on you. And with that, I extend thanks to all of you for being here, and to Jerry in particular for being here. And Jerry, I introduce you en masse to the leadership of the JCCs of North America. The floor is yours.
So thank you, Gabe. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all your efforts in putting this conference together. Truly amazing. It's I will say to everyone here, this is the first time since I left JFNA that I am participating in a Jewish conference. Not because of COVID, but because I felt it was the right thing to somewhat become a little bit of a ghost in the community. Many people have said, wow, Jerry, incredible timing leaving September of 19 from JFNA. And it wasn't timing at all. It was, 10 years is a good amount of time, but it's so great to see old friends on the Zoom. It's great to see colleagues that I worked with. And I just want to start out by saying how much I appreciate you, what you've had to go through the last year, professionally, personally, dealing with layoffs, dealing with furloughs, dealing with, your buildings being closed for a period of time, overnight camps not opening, some day camps not opening, and the personal toll that I'm sure this last year has taken on all of you as leaders of your institutions. I just can't imagine it. And then, of course, working from home and trying to, maintain some type of semblance of what the go forward is going to be with a lot of unknowns that we were dealing with a year ago is a testament to everyone on this Zoom's hard work, your commitment, and, now as a civilian, I applaud you. I truly do from my heart. It's really an amazing effort that you all have gone through in this journey that no one's ever seen before. I mean, in professional life, this is a unique experience that no one has ever had to deal with. And those of you that are dealing with debt service on your institutions, also it's doubly made it even more challenging. However, I'm a person who believes in the glass half full. I'm a person that believes that you never waste a good crisis. And I truly believe, through this COVID crisis that we've dealt with, there is a stream of sunshine out there. And frankly, I believe there's a stream of sunshine out there for the JCC movement and its agencies, camps and all of your programs. And, if you look at all of the data over the last year and look at donor data, whether it be individual donors or philanthropists or foundations, or people's portfolio, maybe not in the commercial real estate sector, but almost every other sector, they've grown, and they've grown, in some cases, grown dramatically in the last year. And for sure, double digits. And so I look at that pool of money, and I look at it from a sense of who's going to get it? Who's really going to be out there from a sense of the marketplace to take advantage of it, because it is out there. And you know, the question I have to think about as I talk to you today is, you know, how do we being, you know, the JCC Association affiliates, camps who are on this call, how do we increase our penetration into the philanthropic sphere? And as you look at revenue streams, truly decide that 20, 25, 30% of our annual stream of revenues that come in are going to be philanthropic. How are we going to shift that modality of what may have been fee for service, as Gabe talked about, of fitness, early childhood, camping, you know, into this mode. And, you know, in being in both the private sector and the public sector, you know, I look back and say, wow, there's different experiences and different learnings that I've had. And one of the most fascinating ones was taking certain board members and certain professionals on your team, and even some outside people, and literally go somewhere and dream. Try to shed the weight that's on all of your shoulders and has been. And you have to dream. You have to think forward. We can't look in the rearview mirror if you want to take philanthropy seriously as a part of the revenue streams. And you really have to come out and dream as to what is the possible. You need to look at and ideate your mission and say, okay, here's our mission. Okay, how do we ideate this? And your profit offering, and something I call your emotional grab, because in every one of your institutions, there is emotion that's coming out of it in across the board. And emotion is what is to me ignites giving. Emotion, relationship, connection, and impact all drive giving. And you have all of that. Everyone on this Zoom has absolutely all of that. And frankly, and I say this publicly, you know, I don't know that there's another organization in the Jewish community right now, if I have the numbers right, that services more people than what this movement does. You know, I've talked to Daron, and you know, on the Canadian-US basis, you're serving 1.5 million, I believe, Jewish people who walk through your doors every single week, or did, and hopefully will again. And nobody has that reach that you do. And I don't look at it in the past tense, that you do. So we already start off, you know, by having a leg up. Of having this incredible group of consumers that are walking through your door. You have the largest early childhood program, and the largest day camping program, and the largest overnight camping program of any other movement, any other group of camps in the country. Many of you serve seniors. You serve those with disabilities, and many of you serve Holocaust survivors. The emotional material is all there to ideate and build your story going forward. You know, I'm a big believer. I always look in the private sector. I look for great ideas. I have no problem with plagiarism when it comes to ideas and looking what others do. You know, I look at Amazon and say, okay, Amazon's initial idea was to become the biggest online bookstore in the world. That was all they wanted to do. Jeff Bezos did not. You know, from everything I read early on, that was the initial idea. But he kept ideating. he kept pushing the limits. He kept having a team together who could push the limits. And we see today what it's become in, basically 20 years. This brash, person, I won't say Lashon Hara, but this brash person who owns Tesla, has created this amazing company with ideas and space and all kinds of things, always continuing to ideate. And even if you look at Uber and how Uber disrupted the market, and there's case studies in the Jewish sector. If you go back 20 years, you can look at Birthright. You can look at, frankly, at the Foundation for Jewish Camp, which back in 2003, 2004 was not an entity that was raising any money and that wasn't taken that seriously. And then an organization I've become familiar with most recently and have worked with and have watched a vision and idea somewhat gone global in an organization out of Israel called United Hatzalah, and which is a first responder organization in Israel, which I'll talk about. And so I talked to a lot of people. I actually went off site pre-COVID with Daron and his team, where we spent an entire afternoon dreaming and ideating. Okay, so COVID created a little bit of an interruption, but the idea was to take the time to begin thinking about these things. And, to me, it starts with, have as much data as you can about the information of your consumers, of the people walking through your door, of people that are interested in your mission, in your community and beyond. Every company, both nonprofits and for-profit companies today, are investing in analytical tools and data analytics today, because that's where the market's going. Is people want data information and data-based information to understand their customer base. And what do you know really about the customer walking through your door? Do you know enough? How should we know more? How should we look at it? And I think that's a great opportunity, both from the national system as well as the agency system, to really look at. And what type of true relationship do you have with the people walking through your doors? The more you know, the more you can ideate and think about how you want to position yourselves for the future. I'll use a case study, and I'll use the Foundation for Jewish Camp. So in 2004, Foundation for Jewish Camp was trying to do a few programs for the camping world, was trying to do X, Y, and Z, but really hadn't, built a strategic plan, hadn't built a strategy, and hadn't really ideated. Well, it came to pass that, okay, we finally went out and we, really dreamed together with some key staff and board members, and we decided there's going to be 4 areas where we can add true value to the camp community. One is the camp excellence. The second is in trying to get more kids to choose Jewish camp, not against private camps, but against all other summer programming. The third level is if we do 1 and 2 right, there's not going to be enough beds. And 4 is how do we put camp in front of the Jewish community so that, based on the research, it's not viewed by donors and foundations as a nice to have, but it truly is one of the legs of the step stool of Jewish identity. And so we had 4 different areas. And so we started ideating the 4 areas. And within the 4 areas, we were able to come up with, big ideas. One was, for those of you that are familiar with camp, know that it's an autocratic society. It's run by the executive director. Many organizations are, many JCCs may be autocratic. But the fact is that there was never any investment in those directors. I mean, real serious leadership, executive leadership programs. And so one that we took 2 years in development creating, and we created the program first and then got it funded. And all of a sudden, $3 million in funding that put 60 directors through an 18-month serious program. Now, you know, that focused on camp. The second thing that focused on camp was saying, you know, we need to understand data, and we need to understand what the customer really is saying about their camp experience, not through the type of surveys that are done, but let's do an online survey for parents and kids. And so we got a funder to put up $4 million to both create an online presence in a survey that was for the camp and for the camp's needs, and also put up, you know, $4 million in matching grants that if the camp would put those dollars in the areas that were viewed as needing work, that they would match their investment. So all of a sudden you had that. You know, the third is, how do we get more kids to Jewish camp? Well, we created a concept called One Happy Camper. And we went to a funder, and that came about on somebody who never gave Jewishly before. Or I shouldn't say never gave Jewishly, never gave publicly Jewish dollars before. And that came back at a $60 million gift to Jewish camp, you know, over a 6-year period. And then number three is if we did 1 and 2 right, we weren't going to have enough beds. We created a new camp incubator, which yielded another 12 or $13 million to create new camps. My point is, we had a real clarity around the areas. We then had products to fit those areas that, you know, had some uniqueness, and in some ways didn't have uniqueness, but we were able to go to donors that way. And if you look at it, we were both able to raise money from foundations and from donors who weren't always on the beaten path. And so that's what can happen when you have a package, and you can talk about your institution with that kind of clarity, but with that kind of vision about where you're going, what you're going to do to really affect and impact the future of your mission. You know, it starts with taking some time. Now, I can tell every one of you that are on this, I think there's 91 people on this Zoom right now. You're all dealing with something that consultants would say, in consultant speak, is time poverty. Every one of you, I'm willing to bet, is impoverished with time. And I say back to you that if you want to take advantage of this coming out of the crisis of COVID and position yourselves forward, it is a great investment to you, your staff, and your future by spending some time really thinking about the future and what the possibilities are. And then how can you harvest those possibilities? Because they're out there to do. You know, you can come out of it with an aggressive approach, I believe, you know, to grow your philanthropic pie as you move forward. Because I will tell you, some organizations are going to go out and get it. Why not the JCCs and the JCC camps? Why not? Okay, because it's going to be out there to be gotten by someone. And, you know, so many institutions are, you know, beginning to look above, you know, the fence with vaccinations and everything else that are going on. But are you really looking, into the next field and saying, here's where we're going to be, and this is what it's going to take to get us there. And whether it's debt relief, whether it's new programs, however you position it, it needs to be positioned in a way that tells a story of the future and what the JCC of your community truly means. And it definitely has opportunity. Using the facilities you have as a tool and models of allowing people to reconnect. I mean, people are so starving to reconnect on a communal basis. It's unbelievable. And you are so uniquely positioned for this. And you're so uniquely positioned to take this and create an emotional story and product around this and capability around this that I don't think others have. Now, I'm a civilian now, so I don't ever pretend to sit in your chairs. But as I was thinking about it, how would I begin? And, I would start with a clean piece of paper, as hard as that is, with all the different baggage, not that you've created, but baggage that you're dealing with. I would truly start with a clean piece of paper to understand what are the possibilities. What can we be? What will have the biggest impact to our customer and our community? And then I would start asking ourselves the questions as we're thinking about that. Who are the influencers that we need at our table to be part of this? Because you want influencers to be at the table. And you want them for both their ideas, you want them to own this, and you want them to be investors. And at the same time, you want their access to others. And you want to come through this type of planning and ideating and coming out with these possibilities, because at the end of the day, it's going to be your breakthrough strategy. It's going to create a breakthrough strategy for you. And each one of you, I would suggest, there's a lot of likenesses, but there's a lot of differences between different cities, city size and whatnot, which I understand. But every one of you have this opportunity right now. And I will say this window is going to stay open for 6 to 9 months, and then it's going to close. But now is the absolute time. Now, some people will say, oh, well, this isn't realistic. It's not possible. Jerry, you may not understand our model. In the private sector, I started working for a company in the early 80s that was doing the same thing, and then decided, oh, we're just going to buy a lot of other companies that will solve our problem. But it didn't solve the basic issue of thinking big and thinking towards the future. And a new leader came into the company and he just said, stop with this. We're going to focus, on our mission, but we're going to really look at the possibilities of what we can be in the market. We were a $2 billion company at the time. Company was called Levi's. And you say, oh, Levi's. Well, $2 billion company that was a public company that was in the throes of its bank covenants being called in 1979, 1980, 1981 too. And so they were really challenged. But a new person came in, this isn't the route we're going to go. We're going to take the company private and get the investors off our back, and came up with something not dissimilar to what we did at FJC, but a real roadmap of the mission laid out in 4 or 5 areas, and got rid of all the companies that were purchased over the last decade, and said, we're going to have one brand called Levi's, And then in 1986, 87, through data, they said, you know, there's an opportunity to start a khaki brand called Dockers. And, you know, that $2 billion company in the early 80s, by the early 90s, became a $7 billion company. But it was through this strategy of looking at the marketplace where they were under attack by all the designer genes and everyone else, and took the time to step back and look at the possibilities for the future and move forward. You know, that's an interesting case. The other is at FJC, we were an $800,000 agency in 2004. You know, by 2009, we were about $25 million that was being invested back in the Jewish camping. Again, using that model. And it was great staff. It was the founders. It was a great board that made it happen. And, you know, I also look at this organization that I'm working with now in the throes of COVID called United Hatzalah. United Hatzalah, which is the first responder organization in Israel that's built off volunteerism. 6,500 volunteers that are connected to a dispatch center. Without getting into the long story, are amazing people from all walks of life: Muslim, Christian, secular Jews, Haredi Jews, across the board, who only care about saving lives. And they get to an emergency in 90 seconds to 3 minutes in the metropolitan areas of Israel. Now, COVID hit. A lot of the volunteers got COVID, their families got COVID in Israel. And the head of the organization, who was the rainmaker, was in Miami, and he got COVID. And he was he was in a coma and on he was on a respirator for 23 days at Jackson Memorial. And there's nobody gave him, you know, more than a 10 or 20% chance to live. Thank God he did. But the organization during that time, you know, really came together and said, you know, here's the opportunity that's happening in the Israel market. We need to really explain what's happening in Israel and support Israel. And we looked at things and looked at the opportunities, you know, on how we were going to have impact, whether it was opening a humanitarian center for those people whose families couldn't serve them anymore, and to make sure that our volunteers supported their efforts. The United Hatzalah did transport of COVID patients to hospitals or to hotels. And then recently, during the vaccination that took place, United Hatzalah volunteers were asked to call the 20,000 Holocaust survivors in Israel and transport them to get their vaccines, which they're finishing up right now. And at the same time, oh, by the way, they had a 22% increase in fundraising during the COVID crisis, because there was a real ability to explain in the different categories that they were working as to what truly is happening. And I would just share with you, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. I just want to share with you that I truly believe, and I for those of you that know me, know I don't blow smoke, and as a civilian, I don't have to blow smoke. If there was ever a time for the JCC community of agencies to thrive coming out of COVID, it's now. I absolutely, truly believe it. I truly believe that you have to try to, shrug off a little bit the baggage for a day or two and try to think about the possibilities and think about what that means. And what would it mean to your agency if all of a sudden 25%, 30% of your revenues were philanthropic? And if you build those relationships, it's not a 25 or 30% philanthropic revenue stream in 1 year. It's a 30 to 35% revenue stream that can be sustainable and can be grown. And it's just a matter of you know, how you look at it. And I think the opportunity is there for you. I think you are the right professionals. You've come through a very difficult time and survived. And, you know, I really, really hope that many of you will think about this opportunity and think about shaping it through your lens, but don't miss this opportunity, because the dollars are absolutely there for you to take advantage of. But you have to do it smart. You have to do it with some real thinking, and you have to do it with real fresh air and come at it to the community with a real freshness. Because I don't think anyone else has the opportunity that you do right now. I'm going to leave it at that, Gabe. I'm going to open it up for questions. I'll throw some questions at you just as a beginning point to think about. But, you know, a couple of things is, you know, what's your biggest fear in doing this? Because some of this is, you know, a little bit of fear that comes into place about, you know, trying to move forward in when the clouds are gray. And what is holding you back from moving forward in this way? And if not, have you started thinking about that? And would you share that with others? So just some questions for you to think about and answer, or other questions you have, but really a privilege to spend time with you today.
Jerry, thank you. Thanks for the remarks and for the questions to the group. And I invite folks to click on raise hand to respond to what Jerry asked or share something else. I have a few, but I see Dave already raised her hand. So why don't you go ahead, Dave?
Just to respond to Jerry's final question, I think that one of our greatest strengths is also our greatest liability. We do a lot of things. So it means anything is possible, and then we can continue to dream about what we haven't yet achieved, or what our next great idea is. But I think the scary part is then what do you let go to make space for it? And too often, at least in places I've been, we haven't been able to let it go. A colleague of mine outside of the JCC world was talking about we need like a good youth in Asia program for Jewish communal programs that should die. But we all see the value in each thing and each person it serves. And there's not enough airspace to do all of this and achieve the greatness you're describing around the next big idea. And I think it's an important pause, because we should be doing it. It's just, it's hard to do.
But David, you bring up such a great point, because, you know, we never let go as a Jewish people of almost anything. And so I would just say to you, using, you know, two different examples in my career, you know, one of the things I learned from a guy named Bob Haas at Levi's was, you know, we owned Resist All hats. We owned Frank Shorter running gear. We owned Corette of California. You know, we had 9 different companies that we owned when he came aboard. And he said, I'm selling them all. He said, be damned with it. I'm selling them all, and we're going to focus on Levi's. Now that you can do in you know, in that environment a little easier than maybe you can do. But if we don't shed the things that aren't maximizing our potential and our mission, and things that we've been doing for a very long time that is meaningful to a few, we are going to have anchors around our necks, and we're not going to come out of it. So David, you bring up a great point, and I really appreciate it.
I wonder if on that score, while other folks are pondering, the case study you offered for United Hatzalah is sort of squarely in the health and human services area. And I think some of the, you know, sort of off the charts giving this past year has been in the health and human services area as a result of the pandemic. I'm thinking about that and thinking about the extent to which JCCs, you know, which parts of their businesses they view as being in that arena and which parts of that arena they view themselves as entering into. I'm thinking about folks who are thinking about holistic wellness programs that go well beyond what they sort of had pre-COVID in their centers. And I'm curious your take and anyone else's take on that direction as something potentially sort of new and beyond, and perhaps eligible for capturing some of the philanthropic dollars you're talking about.
So thanks, Gabe. You know, what's interesting is obviously enormous dollars went to the Health and Human Services, but not in Israel. You know, the giving to Israel was not, was down year over year because everybody was focused on their own community. Everybody was focused on, all the things that you know better than I do that we were dealing with in our own local communities and trying to navigate it. And, Israel's Startup Nation, that was not the priority. So the one thing about Health and Human Services, I would agree with you. But if you look at giving, towards Israel during this time, even hospitals and whatnot was not at the level it was the year before. And so that's why it seemed a little extraordinary that Hatzalah had that type of increase, because it was so far out of the box to give to Israel and not, in addition to their own community or not their own community. The health and human services piece, the question I have is 2 years from now, what's it going to look like? What's the need and the impact going to really look like in the community? Are we going to be in a post-COVID environment completely where we're going to get annual booster shots for those, for those of us that are part of the shot? And so what does that look like? That's what needs to be ideated. That's, if that's one of the 4 pillars or whatever number of pillars or number of areas that you're going to say our JCC is focused in these areas. Is Health and Human Services going to be one of them? I don't know the answer 2 years from now. I don't know what that looks like from a sense of the community itself. The whole concept of connection excites me. The whole concept of the JCC and being one of the great connectors of the Jewish community has real meaning when I think about it, and I think about the possibilities from an area that, that I would love to unpack and think about what those opportunities can look like. Because there's not many others that can have that type of connection, through a broad range of the community that JCCs can. So I'm not sure about the Health and Human Services, only because I'm just not sure what the future holds there.
I see Elise's hand, and I'll call her in a second. I'm curious to hear what others would like to contribute on that subject that I asked Jerry about. If you'd like to comment, Elise from Montreal.
Hi. Can we talk a little bit about fundraising for things that are not sexy and don't have a story? I have a 300,000 square foot building that's 70 years old that needs a new roof, new boilers, new windows. How do you go about attacking those types of problems from a fundraising perspective?
So there's different ways of doing it that I always looked at. I look at multiple revenue streams, for an annual budget. Whether it be, for example, when I was looking at revenue streams for FJC, which had one, we had 5 revenue streams. We had a board of directors minimum giving, which was unrestricted, which paid for the lights, the offices, whatever. We created something new, which again, I stole from an organization called PEAGE, the idea, and from somewhat of what Hillel International does. was I created something called a group of trustees. And we asked the trustees who were big names in the community to commit to 5 years and give $200,000 a year. And for unrestricted dollars. And after 5 years, we said, that's the only commitment. If you want to continue, great, but there'll be no pressure to stay on. And during those 5 years, the goal was to add 4 or 5 new ones each year. So by the time you got to the 5th year, that first group could walk away and there would be no issue with the dollars coming in. We also looked at grant money as a revenue stream, which every grant had an overhead piece. And every grant, part of the overhead was absolute structural for the organization. It wasn't just paying for the overhead of the program itself, it had to pay for overhead of the institution. That's number 3. Number 4 was an annual type campaign that we had that was actually the smallest, of what we did and how we did it. And the 5th was what I would call, let's just say, I called it shadow fundraising. It was trying to find 10 donors a year who weren't giving significantly to the Jewish community, who were somewhat under the radar, and really try to bring them out either publicly or anonymously. So to answer your question, we looked at it, and I looked at it from a sense of the whole package of product, program, non-sexy. And I looked at our revenue streams, ensuring that we always had unrestricted dollars coming in for the non-sexy. But it was based on multiple revenue streams. It wasn't one revenue stream taking and owning that. Because you're right, people don't necessarily love to give to boilers or love to give to pumps, or love to give to the inner workings of a swimming pool. They like things that are more sexy, and it's hard to put somebody's name on a boiler and a pump. So, but that's how we did it, was not have it rely on one specific revenue stream.
Right, but if we haven't budgeted, which is our case, right, because this is a go forward kind of approach. I have $6 million of CapEx where a roof could cave in. What do? You wait till the roof comes in and say, save us, the roof caved in?
Well, let the roof cave in first and then save us. But, don't be in the building when the roof caves in.
Luckily, we're closed.
Well, I would say unluckily you're closed. But, you have to build towards it. It's not going to happen overnight, but you got to build towards it. It's not, if the roof caves in, you'll figure something out. I'm sure the Federation will come in and just hand you a check, right? But the key is not, again, you can't change it overnight, but within 3 or 4 years you can change it, and you can become less dependent and less worried overnight by building multiple streams to do this and make this happen. From a fundraising, again, a crisis is a roof falling in or a CapEx, something that's completely unexpected. I always found that not necessarily to be the hardest ask, because it's immediate, it's an emergency, we can't run because of it. And sometimes, donors will react and want to step in. Maybe not in Montreal, I don't know, but I know in other places they have.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Jerry, I wonder if I'm articulating some of the thoughts in folks' heads on this call. The perennial question, does size matter? Some of the things you're talking about are are they too ambitious for a very lean staff, small center? Can you talk to that notion?
So the answer is, from my point of view, I mean, I look at it and again, it's maybe a touch dated, but I look at it and, when we started with a small organization of, 800,000, we had 4 staff and 6 board members. So we just put the investment of the time, it's not a month. I mean, it's a couple of days to really begin ideating, and then, having meetings every single week and staying consistent to looking forward. So it doesn't matter the numbers. It matters, what the vision is and what that commitment is in wanting to change the makeup of the revenue. It's not going to happen unless you really think it through and put some plans into place to test it. And oh, by the way, don't be afraid to fail out of the box. It took a year at the foundation for us to begin getting some traction. We failed a couple of times. It was okay. We learned from it. And you say, well, you don't have a chance. And, we can't fail because we have, we're at the brink. I get it. With an $800,000 budget, we were at the brink too. We had a year's supply, if not less than a year's supply to cover expenses. So, but you're not going to get out of that quicksand of that thinking unless you begin to move forward and think that way. You just won't.
Jordan, I wonder if you elaborated on your lunch with a donor. I'm wondering if you're willing to hop on and share a little more than you shared in chat. I'll put you on the spot.
Happy.
Dan.
Yeah, no, thanks, guys. I mean, happy to. Well, first off, it was, for the first couple of months of the pandemic, I kind of thought, well, it's impossible to ask for money again. I can't have lunch or coffee with anyone. And then I figured out a way to, but it's nice to go back to the old kind of lunch that we used to have with vaccines and outdoors. But the discussion really was talking about where we're going for the future and talking about, the suggestion from them, and they're very good. One is a serial entrepreneur and really knows how to build brands, is, if you have a strong brand, that people will come to your program based on it. If the brand is only based on your program, maybe your program has an off year. Maybe someone's disgruntled one year with your preschool, and it doesn't necessarily survive in the same way that if you just have a centrally strong brand. And so then we started talking about it a little, but I said, look, part of the issue is that we have 15 different brands, some of which appeal to, or 15 different businesses rather, that appeal to different demographics, some higher income, some lower income, some of different ages. So kind of what is the through line that we can have for all of them? We were talking about, can you animate it with arts and culture? Can you animate it with Judaism? Can you animate it with community? But still, all of those don't necessarily seem as sticky as some other brands. So at least that's kind of something that we're thinking about and wrestling with.
Sherry, branding?
Listen, the person who you were speaking to is absolutely right. The brand is not the programs. The brand is 14th Street Y, if I'm getting that right, Jordan. That's the brand. The brand is, the strength of the 14th Street Y, and that you provide excellence in certain areas. Forget the programs. These are the certain areas that people know that you will provide excellence in. And you've got to evaluate those areas to see, from my perspective, is I would look at those areas and say, which ones have the legs to really build to a whole nother level? Which one of those areas just we can take, as a moonshot, and go after in whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 of those areas, depending on the capabilities and capacity you have. And I would be hesitant out of the box to cut anything out of the 14th till you started piloting and testing. But what you will find is if you start to go to the moon in 2 or 3 or 4 of the areas, all of a sudden you're going to find number of 14, 13, 12, even though it may be hitting a certain consumer that you may want to give up to someone else, because you're becoming, you're hitting the bullseye of your equity of your brand by really hitting in the areas that are the absolute most important. And you can talk about that from any brand building exercise. You look at you take a bullseye, you take a target, and I'm not talking about the store target, but you take the target emblem, and the bullseye is your brand. And when you go through this possibility exercise, you go through it and say, what's the bullseye? And every time you get farther outside the bullseye, I will tell you, from experience, nonprofit, for-profit sector, the farther you get away from that bullseye, the less equity you'll achieve and the less recognition you'll get from the community and from donors.
Jordan, thanks for being on the spot.
Thanks,
Jordan. Let's go to Dan Horowitz in Miami.
Totally. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Jerry. Thanks so much for being with us today. I'm curious to hear your thoughts using the United Hatzalah as kind of the case study. As an outside observer, I would think that the biggest loser by virtue of United Hatzalah's success has been Magen David Adom. That there was a pre-existing organization in the space that had motorcycles that people were funding in order to go. So there's an innovation on top. And I don't know if Magen David Adom is now the blockbuster to United Hatzalah's Netflix, and that's kind of how it's unfolded, but it's a newer organization on the scene, picking up traction, clearly impacting, I would imagine, Magen David Adom's approach, structure, fundraising, etc. And I can't help but wonder, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, on whether or not and how RJs, both community centers and camps, are maybe more like the blockbuster than the Netflix, courtesy of large pre-existing infrastructure, crumbling infrastructure sometimes, expectations, etc. And as it relates to that creativity piece, knowing that at least for some of us, I would imagine our hands are tied by virtue of being federated agencies supported by our local federations, which come with red tape. No, you can't run high holiday services at your J. You can't even be a landlord for a local synagogue because we don't want to tick off the donors who from that synagogue give to federation, et cetera, et cetera. That's just another level of complication in innovating or in trying to move to a Netflix-esque construct. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
So it's a great question, Dan, and thank you for what you do down in Miami. So it's an interesting question that you talk about as it pertains to Hatzalah and Magen David Adom. Just to adjust a little history, Magen David Adom was specifically a fabulous ambulance service, is a fabulous ambulance service in Israel. When Hatzalah started in 2005, 2006 in Israel, it was because a couple of medics who were on the back of MDA's ambulances were so upset and frustrated, not with MDA, but with the fact that it took so long for ambulances to get to an emergency that they just, their heart couldn't take them losing. In Ellie's case, the one that broke the inflection point was going to go to a house and having a 7-year-old, pass away in front of him, and having a doctor walk in from across the street who said, "God, I wish I would have known. I could have come right over." That was the inflection point of them getting monitors, from Radio Shack and saying, all we want to do is try to get to emergencies faster and hand them to MDA. And Hatzalah has gone to MDA over the last 13 years a number of times to say, how can we work together? And actually, Hatzalah created the AMBU cycle. Not to get into the, who's what, but they actually started the AMBU cycle because of the issue of how do we get there faster to get to an emergency so we can, start working with somebody until the ambulance gets there. And MDA said, "Your competition, we don't want any part of you." And so I don't think MDA by any means is, the Blockbuster to Netflix. MDA has a real role. They created basically the Red Cross blood bank in Israel. Has done some great things. And hopefully someday they'll come together and start taking the best of both worlds together and bring it together. But I don't look at them that way in Israel specifically, because MDA's bullseye now is the blood bank and still the ambulance service they provide, which is so critical. Hatzalah's bullseye is just trying to get to an emergency as fast as possible, trying to stabilize someone or stabilize them to a point where the ambulance can take them. And that's why you have 6,500 volunteers, who just want to do that. That's all they care about. I think that the question about JCCs and JCC camps, I don't think they're blockbusters. I think if JCCs, and I'll leave camps aside, but I think JCCs specifically, if we're doing the same things at JCCs that we're doing today 10 years from now or 12 years from now, and haven't really thought through the future of what the possibilities are that JCCs can be to a community in a different way, I think we could be headed towards a blockbuster, not for certain, but could be. Camps, again, I think have to keep evolving and changing and analyzing and learning. I think the overnight camp business is still a very healthy business, public and private. Played golf on Friday with one of the largest private camp owners in the Northeastern Seaboard, who has a lot of Jewish kids. And, he shared with me that they're, based on whatever the states say they can fill, they're at 2019 levels. And a lot of the camps are moving towards 2019 levels. The question isn't camps. To me, the question is the commitment to Jewish identity and a Jewish experience, which has the whole, then you're getting into the whole issue of Jewish identity and the Jewish future. That plays a big role into camps. It does play a role into the JCC's future, as to what is the makeup of the consumer. You started talking about federations. Dan, I don't know anything about federations, so it's hard for me to speak to federations. I know Brian in Pittsburgh doesn't have that problem, so why should anybody? But I think the only thing I can say about it, because I stay very far away from federation speak these days, the only thing I would say is there needs to be a real open strategic discussion between top leadership and professionals at the institutions to talk about the future, because we can't stay stagnant. If we stay stagnant, we're losing. That I would tell you, private, public sector, we have to move forward. We can't stay the same. So I know it's not easy, and I know it's a discussion that's in many communities is tough to have when you're an agency of the federation. Doesn't mean because it's not easy and because you're dealing with some stubborn people, doesn't mean it can't be had. So it's just harder in some communities than it is in others.
Dan, thanks for that question, and thanks, Jerry. And we're going to head up 95 just north of Dan and call on Jesse in Palm Beach.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Jerry, I'm in West Palm, which, you know, of course, every community is unique. We're just more unique than some. And as I'm hearing you talk, and as I'm just, you know, getting out my Blockbuster card to make sure it's still valid, I wonder if we could pivot for a minute, and you could kind of take some of your, you know, expertise and help us. You know, there's 88 leaders in this room. There's strength in numbers. We're all here because we're part of, you know, this association. What can we do to unify 160 very diverse organizations behind a common goal to move our collective need forward? And conversely, what can the association world do? Not just JCCA, but JF&A, who's been instrumental in a lot of our PPP understanding and other things this last year. But tell me about that highway. What can we do, and what can be done to help us, you know, keep our laminated Blockbuster card active and not, you know, not go the way of the beta machine?
So, you know, first of all, we need to, you know, switch the Blockbuster card for either Bitcoin or Dogecoin. So we should just get into crypto right now and move away from cards. But you know, I will say to you what I shared with Daron, you know, directly and transparently. I think we're at a moment in time in the Jewish community where there's an incredible opportunity for collaboration and looking at organizations in a different way. If you look at where we are today, is not much different than where we were at the turn of the century. It's really, you know, from a structural standpoint, we're still very similar. The consumer has changed dramatically. The consumer patterns have changed dramatically. The way the consumer comes together has changed dramatically. So we as a community need to really, take advantage of the assets we have, but also use those assets very differently than we have in the past. Taking that to what should we be doing differently? I truly believe that a group of people, you know, people who are visionaries, people that you look up to on this Zoom, people, you know, of varying ages, come together from the Federation world, from the JCC world, from the camp world, and really need to really go through a serious process, because we need to think about Jewish life in the year 2030. It's coming very quickly. I think about it from the fact that I have 2 grandkids in California, and I think about, okay, what's Jewish life going to look like for them out there? And that needs to happen. That concept of a group of smart people that you choose, you know, not that somebody here top down chooses, but that you feel the most confident in being represented by, to really sit at a table and have confidence and trust that they're going to have these discussions and transparently share those discussions, so that, you know, 18 months from now, there's a clear roadmap for the future. That's what really has to happen, that will, in my opinion, either doing it on a communal level or doing it on a national level, it's not any different. But it needs to be done at both levels, and it needs to be done with both an intent to understanding that the market's not going to stay stagnant, either can we, and it also needs to have the view that what are the possibilities of using our assets in different ways to really engage the community to enhance Jewish life and the Jewish future. But those are the only ways it will happen.
Big question and big answer, or challenging answer, I would say. I see 2 more folks in line, and we're getting closer to our end time. So let's go over to California to Scott in Orange County, and then after that we'll hear from Brian, and then we'll close. Scott, you're up.
Thanks, Gabe, and thanks, Jerry, for being with us. I'm going to piggyback a little bit on Jesse's question, and maybe the two of us share wavelengths since we're relatively new in the role. But I'm curious because I completely agree, and I think most of the people in this room agree that there needs to be that conversation both at the local level and the national level. But I'm curious what your advice would be on what if the local community is not ready to have that conversation, or those of us who are in communities that the Federation is not able to support its organizations right now because of various reasons. How do we bring the other community organizations to the table, even if they're going to be kicking and screaming?
You do it through the influencers, money talks. I mean, I hate to say this. I don't hate to say it's the truth. Money talks. And it's through the influencers. And I can't tell you how many funders across the country are ready for this discussion. I mean, across the board. And, I would say that encouraging them to drive not the working agenda, but the agenda of bringing the parties to the table, rather than you as professionals getting into it, is the right approach. Because so many of them at all different segments of our community are ready for that discussion and think it's long overdue.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Jerry. Brian, you are going to be I texted to Brian and said, better make it good. So now I'm saying it publicly, better make it good.
Love the pressure, Gabe. Thank you. Jerry, again, I always appreciate your insight, and you really thread that private sector experience in the philanthropic world. It's, I think, very relevant in the JCC field. My question is what you talked about when you talked about your grandchildren in California, and it jogged maybe one of the pieces, maybe just getting your observation of oftentimes the philanthropists, those that have the influence and the outcomes they're looking for their grandchildren may be very, very different than the parents who are raising those children, as we talk about the next generation. So I just wanted to get your observation on, and maybe just your experience on a bit of how you bring those different worlds together. Obviously, we're in that business as well, but sometimes there's a dichotomy between people that want outcomes of a different generation to a generation that's up and coming.
I'm going to ask you to hold on because I apologize.
Harry's part of the next generation. He's texting and answering you at the same time, so he's answering your question.
Yeah, I hate doing that.
Keep up with the times. That's the.
You might be making a tea time that we don't know.
No, it was a guy named Michael Warren in Israel calling. So sorry about that. I'm sorry, Brian. I got the first part of it, but
it was the generational piece where the outcomes that your child wants for his child. You may be the philanthropist. You have a particular set of Jewish experiences you want for your grandchildren. The parents may have a very different sense of how they view the world. And how do we bridge that? And what's been your experience? I just wanted you to comment a bit on how we bring that conversation to light and how we bring that, because I think that's the world that JCCs are in increasingly.
It's bringing the consumer segments to the table, Brian. It's a great question. The grandparents have to hear from the parents at the table. It can't be the professionals and the grandparents, because too many times the professionals will follow the money. I hate to say it, but it's true. Rather than saying, no, we're not following the money. I mean, I can tell you that we have to have the right people at the table in order to really have impact. And so what you're bringing up is the right thing. It cannot be just professionals and philanthropists, because the professionals don't know all the right answers. The philanthropists don't know all the right answers. That's why you got to have the users, the users of today and tomorrow at the table, and what's in their minds. And that's how we'll get there.
And thanks for the question, and Jerry, thanks for the answer. Jerry, we're reaching our time. Any before I turn things back over to Leah to close us up, any closing thoughts from you?
I just would finish, with this. You are all talented professionals. The fact that you've made it through this year just states that to each and every one of you. Now the time is to really push forward. Now is the time to, take all of the energy that you have put into surviving and maintaining and, maintaining some type of mental balance, and really put it forward into the future, because we're at an inflection point, and you can really make a difference. This organization, it really has the assets to do that, and I really, really look forward to both observing, always available, but really seeing what truly can happen.
Thanks, Jerry. Leah?
Yes, thank you. So, Jerry, on behalf of JCC Association and this very esteemed group of JCC leaders, Gabe and I extend deep gratitude to you for the time and for your wisdom and experience shared. We're also very appreciative of the time spent together today with all of you here, and thank you so much for participating. Jerry, you said earlier that you choose to never waste a good crisis. I love that sentence. And the fact that you said that you're choosing to look across the board for the motion, the relationship, and the impact. This is what JCCs are all about. Your analogy about how you see the stream of sunshine for the JCC movement coming now as a result of this crisis through all the programs and the departments of JCCs. This is the essence of what these amazing leaders are doing day in and day out. And that's the greatness of our JCCs, the greater connector in the Jewish community. And you said that, not me. So amen to that. And thank you so much for sharing that wisdom with us. Now, a few pro-con notes and reminders. The pro-con virtual vendor hall will be open today from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. And again on Thursday, from 1:45 through 2:45 p.m. Eastern. So you're welcome to visit and enjoy. During these times, folks from Microsoft Corporation and Collaborative Strategies and other sponsors will be available for live video sessions and chats. You'll see product demos and have an opportunity to ask questions about how vendors' products and services can best help your JCC. Also, later today, and this is something we're very, very proud of, we hope you and some members of your staff will be able to participate in JCC Cares. JCC Cares is a continental community service opportunity that will take place today from 5:15 to 6:15 Eastern. And everyone is welcome to join this partnership with Repair the World to support initiatives with Neighbor Network and VAX volunteers. With Neighbor Network, JCC professionals will connect with seniors who are experiencing unprecedented isolation as we pre-screen seniors for local services and programs. Alternatively, you can help VAX volunteers update their site with vaccine volunteer opportunities. With new vaccine distribution sites opening daily, there are critical volunteer needs struggling against the decentralized system. We'll be helping VAX volunteers with state-by-state searches to identify new vaccine volunteer opportunities. Please join us for this important work. Moving to tomorrow's ProCon schedule, the day begins with something we're calling Mindful Motivator at noon Eastern. Participants can choose from one of several mindfulness opportunities, including meditation, movement, and goal setting. These sessions are sponsored and led by instructors from Les Mills Fitness. The second peer community session will be held tomorrow at 12:30 Eastern. And the topic for this group of JCC execs is leading a JCC in a time of turbulence, and features Marty Linsky and both Michael Waldman, the CEO of the Minnesota JCC, and Brian Siegel, the CEO of the Detroit JCC. The conference site on SpotMe has more information about this session and the Zoom link, and we really hope you'll join us. So again, with deep thanks to Jerry Silverman and to all of you for being here, this peer community for tonight is adjourned. Good night and Laila Tov.